So, I wanted to talk about Soulblight Gravelords and their second edition Battletome. Initially, I was going to go through all of the Allegiance abilities, all the sub-faction rules, the spell laws, and all the war scrolls, and give my opinion on each sort of one, all the problems, the way you can use them together, and the good bits about them and all that. But since they've announced a new Battletome in about a week, there's not a lot of point in doing that. But I thought I'd still offer my thoughts on what we got out of that second edition Battletome, the things they did right, the things they did wrong. And the main reason I want to do that is because Warhammer seems like it's a community-driven game. So I'm not necessarily trying to pump out content to make a big channel, but I just think it's the kind of game where everyone offers their 2 cents and you talk about it and you think about it. And so this is just me doing that. But if it turns out that you like this kind of video and you like my thoughts on things like this, showing support is a good way to signal to me that you would like me to make more videos like this in the future. So yeah, I'm just going to go through the strengths and weaknesses of the Soulblight Gravelords Battletome, what they improved on from Legions of Nagash, and what I hope sort of happens when we get the new Battletome. I know none of it's going to change because the Battletome's already set, but having played Soulblight since it was Legions of Nagash, I think I sort of saw some problems in the Soulblight Battletome when it came out, and those problems got worse over time. I think I was kind of right in my predictions about it, and I think it'll be interesting to see how the new book changes and whether they've learned from those mistakes. And I'll probably do a video going through that new book once I get my hands on it. So let's get it. So what went well? There's a big change was something that was actually quite small in the book, and that's the removal of crypt shields. In Legions of Nagash, a lot of units had this crypt shields ability that gave them +1 to their armor save against Ren nil. Now I imagine when the book was printed, and I wasn't playing back when Legions of Nagash was printed, but I imagine back then fewer things had Ren, so this ability would come up more. But by the end of Legions of Nagash's sort of timeline, everything has at least Ren 1. So this Crypt Shields ability weakened over time. It just made the army really, really fragile. And it was on like everything with a shield, even Blood Knights. Blood Knights actually just had a 4-up save in the previous book, and then had this +1 to their save against Ren nil weapons. That was horrible. That made playing that unit feel really bad, because -1 Ren would put your Blood Knights, your heavily armored cavalry, all the way down to a 5-up save. It felt horrendous. About the only upside of this ability was you got to like skip rolling bad saves. So your Skeleton Warriors had a 6-up save with +1 against Ren nil. So against Ren nil, they got a 5-up. It was worth rolling. Against -1, they don't get any save, but that's fine. Then you don't have to waste time rolling 6-up saves, I guess. That's about the only upside. So most of the Crypt Shields, the Skeleton Warriors, the Blood Knights, and the Graveguard had their Crypt Shields changed from that weird +1 against Ren nil to just improving the save characteristic. Unfortunately, with the Graveguard, they didn't improve the save characteristic. They left that as a +1, and I think that's the main reason why people don't use the Sword and Shield. But even still, removing Crypt Shields was one of the best decisions they made, and just improving the saves in general. Like Manfred got a save bump, and Neferata, I think, as well. They really needed that. So, gravesite improvements were the other big thing. I think this was probably the biggest change in the book. It looked little, but there's 2 changes to gravesites, and they're both really, really big, going from Legions of Nagash to Soulblight Gravelords. The first one is changing 9 inches to 12 inches. This only seems like a small increase because it's only 3 inches. It's only a third extra, but the area that you get when you expand the radius of a circle is disproportionate to the increase in the radius. So it's actually like a 50% increase in the amount of space you have to put your models. It makes a massive difference in terms of how much area on the board you can control. And it also makes a really big difference in being zoned out, because what your opponents used to do was just put one model right in the middle of your gravesite, and then you couldn't summon anything out of it because you have to be 9 away. It's a 9-inch circle. Now you've got another 3 inches, and that's usually enough to fit small units, which are like your returning half-strength units and the little 10-man skeletons that you put in the grave and things like that. It makes a really, really big difference. The other change, and I think this one, I'm not sure is actually good for the book, but is a dramatic improvement in the power level of the book, which I haven't mentioned, but I don't think there's anything wrong with the power level of Soulblight. I just think the power's in sort of the wrong spot, but we'll get to that. So not needing a hero near the gravesite. In Legions of Nagash, you used to have to move your hero to be within 9 of the gravesite and then use a command ability, or if it's just pulling up a unit you put in there earlier, he has to be within 9, and then you can set up the unit also wholly within 9 and 9 away. So it was very restrictive, and having to move the hero over there meant that you didn't have this constant backboard pressure the way you do now, right? Legions of Nagash, especially if you weren't playing Legion of Night, would deploy on one side of the battlefield, and the only way they can get troops on the other side is by moving them there, right? Even if you put units in the grave, you'd have to move something like Manfred all the way over there. And I think that's part of the reason why heroes like Manfred have such a high move characteristic. And in the past, the movement spell gave you 5 inches movement, but you could use Locus of Shaiish to double it, so you could get 10 inches movement. So if you had Manfred roll the movement spell and get the double, he would shoot right up to 26 inches movement, and he could even run on top of that. He could get all the way across the board to a gravesite that your opponent hadn't defended and summon units right onto it. And I think that was fun at the time, but now you just don't need to do that. You don't need the hero, you don't need any of the like shenanigans. I remember playing Legion of Night and putting like a Vampire Lord in ambush, so he would ambush on near a gravesite and then summon summonable units out of the gravesite. But you don't need any of those tricks. You can just summon dudes right onto the battlefield like you're playing Stormcast Eternals almost, and it's a huge change in like the play style of the army. And it's such a small rule change, just not needing the hero. It's a massive buff to the army. And I think that's what's kept them in the meta, what keeps them at having such a high win rate, despite what I'll talk about in the future. I think as far as War Scrolls, there were improvements in Skeletons, Zombies, and Graveguard. Skeletons before used to have like Horde bonuses, so they would go up to 3 attacks each if you had, I think, more than 20. And this meant they had this weird damage dealing roll, but Hordes were real hit and miss. You have to move like 40 skeletons around and get them onto a target without really taking damage first so they could deal damage. And it still even wasn't that much damage, even with 3 attacks each, because they were like 4s and 4s. They really didn't do a ton of damage. But if you buffed them up enough, it would be worthwhile. But moving 40 models with 4-inch move to try and get the first strike is really difficult. And if you got hit first, you would drop down 20 guys like that. Like they don't survive, especially with those crypt shields. So the change to skeletons made them a lot more durable. If they survive the charge, which 35 up saves doesn't always survive the charge, but if they survive, they get back up. They're a lot more resilient. They've got sort of a real role now. They're much better at being a tough sort of tar pity anvil type unit. I wouldn't think they're a true anvil. They're not quite as durable as they need to be for that role, but they're certainly a lot better than they used to be. I think the same thing with zombies. Doing mortal wounds now really differentiates them, gives them a bit of a role in the book because we don't have that much rend. So having access to some way to do mortal wounds is a good thing. I think they're still a bit dependent on a command ability in specific, like the Vampire Lord command ability. And, if you get roared or something, you just have a bunch of dudes, again, that are very slow and very fragile that do very little. But it's still a big improvement. I think zombies are much, much better than they were in the old book. Nobody took them in the old book as far as I can tell. Similar thing with Graveguard. Graveguard used to be really overpriced and no one would take them. Now they do 2 damage. They do damage, mortal wounds on a wound of a 6. And that is, again, in the book, so starved for rend, those mortal wounds, and just the high damage output that actually makes them a really, really good unit. So I think these were all really big improvements. Sad that they got the bad version of shields. Instead of it making the save characteristic a 4-up, they give you +1 to your save. That's really, really disappointing. I think people overestimate how much of a difference the weapons make, because the swords get +1 to wound, and so much of the damage is in the 6s to hit, 6s to wound doing a mortal wound. The profiles are actually a lot more similar than they look, and I think if they actually got that 4-up save characteristic, that might make the difference between taking the great weapons and the sword and shield. Even still, there's a massive improvement to Graveguard. The last one I want to talk about here is Manfred. Manfred got way, way better. Neferata got a bit better too, and mainly because they went to a 3-up save and I think got an extra wound. But also, Manfred got an ability that made him really hard to kill in melee, and I think that was a really good improvement for Soulblight. Soulblight really struggles to, I'm going to say, cheat. They're a very, very fair army. They don't have access to a lot of the really powerful rules other factions do. And this one felt like one of them sort of cheating kind of rules where you're really twisting the game around and doing something that's hard for your opponent to figure out. I think that combined with the general low damage of the army and him having, +1 to hit and wound buff on everything nearby, I think it was really, really good. It's just, to me, he's kind of an auto-include, and it feels frustrating kind of list building and thinking, I need to have this special named character in basically every one of my lists just so I can have enough damage output to actually kill things. Maybe that's not everyone else's experience of Manfred or of Soulblight Gravelords, but that's certainly what I found. Nonetheless, I really like Manfred. I like him as a character. He's probably one of the first models I bought for the army, and he got a lot better in Soulblight Gravelords than he was previously. So I think these are the biggest changes from the previous book, but we needed a lot more. The Legions of Nagash book was really bad, so I'm going to talk a bit about what didn't go so well. So, Soulblight has many weaknesses and few strengths. It lacks flavor, has a lot of non-bows and a bit of bloat, and it's got some bad war scrolls. Not a lot, but some of them. So many weaknesses, few strengths. Soulblight has basically no access to shooting. It's a theme with the Death Armies. Not every army needs shooting. It's fine to have weaknesses, and I'm fine with Soulblight having no shooting as one of their weaknesses. But they also have really low damage. And again, there are armies that have weak shooting and low damage. I think armies like Nurgle spring to mind. But yeah, it's really hard to find high rend in the Soulblight book. I think you can get rend 2 on like Manfred's Claws, on the Vlozzard bite attacks, and the Vlozzard Lance on the charge, or like specifically Vordry's Lance, and I guess the bite attacks there. The Vampire Lords are really, and I guess Manfred's Claws are all hitting on 4s, I think, or maybe the Lance hits on 3s, but you're only getting that rend on the charge, and it's only 3 attacks. I guess 4 if you're in Legion of Blood. You just don't have access to rend, and not a lot of access to mortal wounds. So you really need those like Graveguard or zombies to do the damage. Both of those units move 4 inches and have horrible armor saves. So Soulblight's not like Iron Jaws or Ideneth, where you can have like a unit of 6 cavalry, like a unit of 6 pigs or something, give them the War Chanter buff, double move them and charge them into something and wreck face. That kind of power doesn't exist in Soulblight. You have to be very cagey and very careful to try and get that block of 20 Graveguard into exactly the right spot and do like a counter charge with maybe the Vampire Lord's +1 attack and Manfred nearby, which I note is like 600 points of buff units to 300 points of Graveguard, then you can start doing real damage. So Soulblight is not a high damage army by any means. They've got fairly low damage. Same token, they're very low durability. This is a bit controversial maybe, because it sort of depends on how you build the army. I think Soulblight has 3 main builds. You can build what I would say is the classic Soulblight army with a focus on skeleton warriors and zombies and this sort of mix of maybe have some supporting cavalry and a big monster, and then big units of battle line that you buff up. That's what I imagine when I think of Soulblight. But you can also do like a full cavalry army that's like Castelli or Legion of Blood or something, and has a lot of Blood Knights and maybe a Vlozzard. That is a bit more durable. But I think if you're doing that, you're better off being in a different book, like Slaves to Darkness or something, right? Where your units, you can build 10 knights instead of taking them in 5s because they fight in 2 ranks. You can give them -1 to be wounded. You give them a banner that gives them -1 to, or reduce the rend by 1, and you can have a 5-up rally. It's much stronger than the Soulblight version, where if you put you could put Blood Knights in a unit of 10 or 15 maybe, and then use a Coven Throne and Mystic Shield or something to really stack their save. You could do a durability build, but it just doesn't work the way that it works in other books. It's really not designed or set up for that. So I'm not really, when I'm making this criticism of being fragile, I'm not really thinking of that type of build of Soulblight or the monster build. I think if you're building the all Terrorgeists list in Ebengori, you should probably just be playing Feck. Like, you really have to love the Lauka Vi or the Vangorian Lord model to want to play that list with a bunch of Terrorgeists in Soulblight. So just a note on that, don't be too hard on me if you think, well, these guys aren't really fragile or aren't really slow because they've got units in the book that move faster. I get it, right? But they're not a durability army. They're not like Nurgle or something like that, where they can take, or Fire Slayers, where they can take an enormous amount of damage and heal it all back. They have generally very bad saves, especially on units that matter, like Graveguard, and not that much in the way of defending them. Seems like they should. Seems like they, with the healing, the amount of text in the book that's dedicated to healing and things like that, they should be more durable than they are. But there's a few specific issues. Even on like Skeleton Warriors. Skeleton Warriors are 30 guys with a 5-up save. Often they'll die before they get back up. And even when they get back up, because of Battle Shock, you can still lose a lot. You might have to save the command point for Inspiring Presence, but you're already using that command point on Manfred so that you can actually do damage with the army. So you're very quickly draining yourself of command points and you don't have a way to get more. So I think, look, people might raise a stink about me saying they're fragile, but I really do think it's a trait of the Soulblight army that they are a fragile army. They can't take a big hit, and often if you position poorly against a decent damage army, you'll get wiped out very easily. Similar token there. They're a slow army, and when I say they're slow, look, there are units in the book that do move quickly. Manfred moves 16, the Vlozzard moves 14, the Knights move 10, you can get Black Knights that move 12. You can make a whole list where the slowest thing in the army is 10-inch movement. But we don't have like move in the hero phase, we don't have run and charge, we don't have an ability to like set up so that we're closer than 9 inches, or a way to have +2 or 3 to our charges. I guess there is a command trait in Legion of Night where you can get +2 to your charge on your, specifically your general. But in general, we don't have access to that sort of thing, the 3d6 charges or the deploying 7 away or any of that sort of stuff. So we're a very slow force in terms of repositioning. We make up for that a fair bit with that Gravesite change with being able to put units in the enemy's backline and with being able to replace our sort of dead summonable units later in the game in the enemy's backline. We can summon new units where we need them. And that's something that other summoning armies don't do. They generally have to summon near their own guys. So, you could raise a stink here about the slow thing being inaccurate as well. But when I think about fast armies, I think about the hero phase move and run and charge, and I don't think about Soulblight. Lastly, another one people might contest, weak magic. Soulblight have a really annoying problem with their spells. They have like a good spell lore, the lore of death mages, with decent debuffs. And they've got a really useless one. The lore of vampires is one of probably the worst spell lore in the entire game. It is just bad. Don't bother with it. Take Flaming Weapon or something. It's really not worthwhile. The only spell in there that you ever take is the one that gives you 6 inches extra movement. And depending on the character, often that's not very useful. So the real issue is that all of our good spellcasters, the ones who get rerolls to cast in Virkos, or +2 to cast in Legion of Blood, those are all vampires, and they all have access to Lore of the Vampires and not to Lore of the Death Mages. The people with the good spells, like Manfred's spell is pretty good, Neferata's spell is really good, the Necromancer's Van Hell Dance, that's a really good spell. None of them get any bonuses to their casting rolls. So we've got like good wizards with bad spells and bad wizards with good spells. And that, I think, is why the magic is weak. There's this weird, like on paper, Van Hell's Dance Macabre is a really fucking good spell. And on paper, rerolls to cast on all your vampire wizards is really good too. But in practice, they don't have any good spells, and the Van Hell's Dance fails because people unbind it. So it's really frustrating to feel like you have all this good magic, but then to not make use of really any of it. The only exception to this, I think, is like Belladamma. While she's in Virkos, she's got some good spells. She's still only 200 points. She's good value at 200 points, but it's not like a big build-around piece that holds the whole army up. It's just like, she's a good bonus to have. She's worth taking. It's not the same thing as having good magic, I think. But in return for all these weaknesses, and again, it's fine to have weaknesses. Every army needs weaknesses. You shouldn't have armies that don't have weaknesses. But usually you have weaknesses that are sort of contrasted against strengths. Soulblight doesn't have access to those cheaty kinds of rules. The really powerful, like 4-up rallies, or like I said, run and charge across the whole army, or fight on death, or 3d6 charges, or any of the you always fights first. These really powerful rules that sort of really warp the game and let you do something really powerful. And moving in the hero phase is another good one. Teleports, we actually don't have teleports. We can't, once we deploy a unit, we can't pick them back up and put them somewhere else. It's very little access to the really powerful tools that other armies use to really warp the game and that really define those armies. And those are what I would say they're the strengths of those armies. Something like when you're playing Iron Jaws, Mighty Destroyers is a big strength. Mobility is a huge strength of that army. It has weaknesses, but it also has really powerful strengths to compensate. Soulblight has at least one strength, and it didn't have it in Legions of Nagash. Right? So I think that's why the change to Soulblight Gravelords is a good change. Now the army's viable, it works, it does something that wins points and wins games. And that's board pressure. It can summon dudes in your back line, and it can do it all the way until the Battle Shock phase of turn 5. Right? There is a threat constantly, all the time, that a unit of 10 skeletons is going to appear on an objective anywhere where there's a gravesite. I know the ones that you put in the grave, they have to come in turn 3, but the ones that die can keep coming back. And even though it's random, your opponent can't risk that randomness a lot of the time. So you put a lot of pressure everywhere at once. Another way the army puts pressure everywhere is that it's very cheap. A lot of the units, like skeleton warriors, when I'm talking about them not really being able to take a hit, it makes sense that they can't take a hit because they're only 240 points for 30 of them. It's frustrating that it's 2 reinforcement points because you run out of reinforcement points really quickly, but for 240 points, they take a hit really well. They don't take a hit as well as 20 Chaos Warriors, but they take a hit pretty well for a 240 point unit. The problem is you don't have enough durability concentrated into the space on the board that they take up. And the same with our damage, right? We don't have enough damage concentrated in the same space on the board. So we can't apply our damage or position our durability in the spaces that we need them to be in, the way other armies can do really easily. But the upside of that is that our models are really cheap, so we can afford a lot of them. We can be everywhere at once, which is something our opponents really struggle to do. And I find myself winning most of the games that I do win by playing in a really wide space on the board and making my opponents split their army up, and they usually make mistakes in where they put their army. And that gives me an opening to take out some key pieces, thin down their army, so they're really playing with as few pieces as possible, and they just don't have enough units to keep up with the amount of space and the amount of threats. Even though they're weak threats, there's a lot of them and they're just sort of all over the place, and I can get a lot of objective points that way. Depending on the battle plan, this doesn't work very well. Like if there's only one objective and your opponent has like a good castle, it's very hard for Soulblight to do anything about it. But big battle plans where you've got like the 8 objectives, you can threaten all of these objectives all the time, and it's very, very hard for your opponent to keep up with the army. I'm not sure that this is the right kind of playstyle for the army thematically. When I think of Soulblight, I don't think of an army that is like outflanking my enemies and sort of so fast that it's everywhere at once. But I guess, you know, an overwhelming swarm, having a lot of models, that is more thematic, that does fit with them. So I can sort of see that there. And it's a good strength. It's good enough to keep our win rate high. Like I said earlier in the video, I don't think Soulblight are underpowered. Their win rate is fine. They do well. I just think that they have a lot of weaknesses and they're not strong in the areas they should be strong in, which is this. The book lacks flavor. I got into Soulblight because I really like the idea of playing the Necropolis, right? I remember back to Heroes of Might and Magic 3 and 5, where you have this army of skeletons and zombies and vampire lords led by a necromancer who keeps summoning dudes back every time. I think there's a big overlap between Heroes of Might and Magic and Warhammer in terms of the way the world is and the kind of lore and the kind of feeling that the armies give off. And I don't see that flavor transfer over into Soulblight Gravelords in a way where the things about the army that are interesting are also powerful. So I'll give you the examples. Weak necromancy. Other armies can bring models back. Every army can rally, and a lot of armies have good bonuses to rally. They rally on a 5-up or even a 4-up, right? Like Fire Slayers can bring back dwarves on a 4-up with their dude with the banner. I would take that over any of the Soulblight healing any day. Armies that bring units back, like the Slaves to Darkness Ravagers or Gloomspite Gits, all the Chaos armies can summon more models onto the battlefield. This ability to bring units back isn't something that's unique to Soulblight, and it should be sort of like a really powerful aspect of the army, and not just because you can put them anywhere. Like, it should feel like we're getting a lot of models back. And if you look at the numbers, we're just not. D3 in your hero phase is not a lot, and it's once per unit. I guess you can combine it with a spell. You have to give up a spell slot, which I guess isn't that bad for your Vampire Lord because he's not really casting anything worthwhile anyway. But bringing 3 more models back is not a big deal when the models you're bringing back are skeleton warriors. And I think this is part of the problem with the balance of Soulblight, is that a lot of their abilities look powerful, but like healing a D3 on a unit that has a 2-up save or a 3-up save is a lot more valuable than healing a D3 on a unit with a 6-up or a 5-up save. All right, getting D3 zombies back is not enough zombies. It just isn't. It's not many zombies. The inconsistency of the getting units back, I'd be really surprised if we're still doing a roll for Endless Legions in the new book. I suspect it'll be a heroic action. That's what it is in Ravagers. They just use a heroic action on one of their guys and they can bring a unit back at half strength. Again, just random dudes showing up is stronger necromancy than the actual necromancy faction. And it feels really frustrating playing an army for a theme of necromancy and just not seeing that represented in the rules basically at all. It is so weak. One rule I did like that is sort of strong necromancy is the skeleton warrior standing back up, but it is so undercut by the fact that the models getting back up don't still count as being slain for battle shock. Like you'll lose 20 skeleton warriors, you get 10 back and then 10 run away. It just feels horrible that your army of the dead has a big issue with battle shock when like no other army cares about it, and it's because you're playing low save, low wound models. So when somebody does 20 wounds to you, like you take 20 wounds and you lose 20 models. You get minus 20 on your battle shock. That doesn't happen to Stormcast because Stormcast only take they'll take 6 wounds because they've got a 3-up save, and they'll lose 3 models and they're bravery 8 or something. So they basically don't run away. And we're meant to be a really high bravery army. We have bravery 10 to represent the fact that we're a very brave faction. Not brave in the sense that we're heroic, but brave in the sense that we actually aren't living, thinking things. They're skeletons. They're constructs summoned by magic. So they should have a sort of durability to battle shock tests, but it's actually, of all the armies I've seen, one of the armies that suffers from it the most. Right up there with, I guess, destruction factions. It's really strange to me that it just flavor-wise feels horrible. Gameplay, I'm sure it's fine, but flavor-wise feels terrible. And again, we're an army desperate for strengths. Why isn't necromancy like a strength of the army? Same thing with spells, right? Necromancy is death magic. The whole premise of Soulblight is that it's an army of, or even just a band of really powerful heroes that have summoned a horde of minions to do their bidding. The heroes have to be powerful. They have to have powerful magic because the whole army exists because of powerful magic, right? And it's just not there. The spells suck, and the wizards that are good at casting have bad spells. The wizards that are bad at casting have alright spells. I don't want to oversell the lore of the Death Mages. A lot of our buffs go into these trash units, so they look better than they are. Being able to pile in and fight twice is a really powerful buff, but we can't put it on like a Velocid, or we can't put it on Blood Knights. People have to keep that in mind. Whereas something like the War Chant is +1 damage, you can put that on anything. And being able to put it on anything makes a big difference. So we have, I would say, weak spells where we should have strong spells. Weak necromancy where we should have strong necromancy. And in general, I think it'd be nice to see something like Invigorating Aura just be much better than it is. Like when they're printing Bloomspike Gits, they've got a new spell on their named character that's like you roll dice equal to the casting roll, and for each 3-up, you do a mortal wound. That kind of thing, but with returning models would make more sense, right? You roll the dice, you get +1 for each of the death heroes on the battlefield, so you're going to roll like a 10, and then for each, you roll dice for each, so you roll 10 dice, and for each 3-up, you bring back a model. Something like that would feel like the kind of power that you would want to be in the book. I understand that like these are buffs, and you would have to make other weaknesses more severe to sort of keep them balanced. I'd be happy to take a hit in sort of the board presence capabilities of the army to have these flavorful things brought forward. Weak heroes is another one. I touched on this earlier, but we have a 5 wound Vampire Lord. Vampire Lords are meant to be enormously powerful beings that hold the whole army up. And I think, like, noticing something like Kato, where he's even just having an extra wound and having the hunger ability, that helps. That goes a long way. And I suspect I'll be shocked if Vampire Lords don't have at least 6 wounds in the coming book. If they keep 5, I'd be really surprised. But yeah, just there's this weird sense that our heroes aren't nearly as powerful as they should be. I understand they should, they might need to cost more. Vampire Lords in particular are a bit of a problem because they're meant to be good at everything. They're meant to be durable and fast and do a lot of damage and be good at spellcasting, and you can't just make the model overpowered. But things like Kato's design philosophy, where he's good at all those things, but only one at a time. You have to pick, is he doing spellcasting this turn, or is he doing movement, or is he doing damage? That sort of thing, I think, allows you to have all of those thematic elements represented without making him overbearing and overpowered. He doesn't need all those buffs at once. And I think they'll move towards that design philosophy. I really do. Weak vampirism. When you look at the book, about the only way that vampirism is represented in the vampire book is that if they slay a model, they heal D3 at the end of the combat phase. That is so little and so weak, and it's such a weak bit of flavor that other books have better versions of it. Like Orcs, I think, have a strength from victory rule on their war bosses, where just when they kill a model, they get like +1 attack and +1 wound. That's probably better than healing a D3. And they just get it just because they like fighting, right? The theme of liking fighting is more powerful than the theme of the Soulblight curse. In the Soulblight book, I just find that bizarre. I find that the lack of connectivity between what you're doing in the game and the concept of a vampire army is frustrating and just kind of boring. I think if they're looking for an area to bolster in the army, they should make the vampirism much more prevalent. It should be a really overriding theme. It should feel different to other armies. But when I play like Blood Knights just look like Chaos Knights. They play like Chaos Knights. They heal D3, but half the time they're not even missing a wound because they took exactly 3 on that turn. Or they heal maybe 1 wound or something, and it doesn't really matter. It's just weak. And I think it could be a lot better. And things like, I guess, the Castelli bonus, that strength from the blood, I think that should be a core rule, not just like a Castelli specific rule. I feel like vampires need something that makes them feel different to non-vampires. There shouldn't just be cavalry that's red. They should have some rule that really represents the vampiric nature of the army. And I guess the last thing is that playstyle mismatch. Like I was saying earlier, it doesn't make sense to me that this army would be a kind of sneaky strike and fade commando style force that is trying to evade the enemy and be in everywhere at once to try and score points. It seems like, to me, it should be a slow, unending horde. It should be like the ocean crashing against the walls of a fort and wearing it down over time. It should be an attrition army. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the whole plan for that is, if you like that playstyle, go play OBR. Maybe that's what Games Workshop thinks about this, and maybe they're right. Maybe splitting it up, so like if you want better healing, all the things I'm talking about, they've got better healing. They always heal the 3 instead of the D3. The model set they're bringing back are more durable. So like maybe when the books come out, we're getting OBR and Soulblight. Maybe it's just that the kind of army that I expected is OBR, and the kind of army that I have is different to that, and I just have to change my expectations. I'm not sure, but I feel like Soulblight needs a stronger flavor because I really like the theme and like the type of character of the army, but it just doesn't translate very well into the rules. Nombos and bloat. Oh my god. Oh my fucking god. The book is filled with this shit. So I think most of these things are an artifact from when the book was changed over from Legions of Nagash. I'm fairly sure they rushed it because of like COVID and Curse City and stuff. And you can sort of tell there's a lot of rules here where they didn't really know what to do. They gave them a real band-aid type of fix and then like shipped the book. So most of the problems here, most of the like bad rules and leftover stuff is left over from Legions of Nagash, and I sort of see why it's in there, and hopefully they'll fix it or it'll be gone in the new book. So good example here is Locus of Shyish. Locus of Shyish is when you roll 9 or higher on a lore spell, not on the war scroll spells, not on Invigorating Aura for some reason, just Lore of the Death Mages and Lore of the Vampires, then you get to cast the spell twice. And as we talked about, Lore of the Vampires is useless. It's horrible. The only spell you like in there is Amethyst and Pinions, the 6 inches extra movement. That spell specifically says you don't get to apply it twice. You can only benefit from it once. The sort of runner-up in Lore of the Vampires is Soulpike, and you can't apply that to the same unit twice either. So that feels a bit dead. In the Necromancer lore, I think Overwhelming Dread, -1 to hit, got worse because -2 to hit is a lot worse. Just because it isn't do anything. If you're -1 to hit, it's the same as -2 to hit. I guess it stops you using all out attack to cancel it out, but it still feels really bad. And I think Fading Vigor might stop you. Wait, no, Fading Vigor -1 attack I think works. The other one, Decrepify. I'm not sure if that one works, but there's a bunch of sort of nombo with the spells, and Locus of Shyish. It's weird that they like print this rule. It's like, yeah, you have really powerful magic. Like they recognize the army should have powerful magic, but then it like doesn't apply anywhere that it should. Don't do that in the future, I guess. I was really excited to see they changed the old Necrarch casting bonus. Necrarch used to get like +1 to cast. I think it was in Legion of Sacrament back when we still had Archon in our book. And it always bugged me that like it was a 9-up unmodified that you got to cast the thing twice, and then you got +1 to cast in this faction. And they changed it to a reroll. And I thought that was such a good change because now when you reroll, you've got a bigger chance of getting a 9 or above unmodified, right? Because a reroll is still unmodified once you roll it the second time. And I thought that is such a good change. And then I saw the Lore of the Vampires and it still sucked. And I was like, what the fuck? I thought you had thought this through. I thought you were like, oh yeah, here's this neat combination of bonuses. It's just not there. I don't know why it has to be an unmodified 9-up. And I don't know why the Lore of Vampires has to be horrible, but it's a non-bow and it feels horrible. So that's probably enough on that one. It really bugs me. They should have just got rid of that whole bonus and I would have been less upset about it. I don't think I've used Locus of Shyish once the whole time the book has been out because you just don't cast the lore spells. All right. Deathly Invocation. Deathly Invocation is this big, horrible fucking mess over here on the right. It's big and pointlessly big. So basically you pick summonable units that are damaged that are near your heroes and you get to heal them. But there's a big chunk of text here explaining, well, if you're like a white king, you can only heal 2 units. And the point of all this was because in the Legions of Nagash book, you could stack them. So if you had 3 heroes standing next to 1 unit, they could all use Deathly Invocation and you would heal 3d6. All right, we used to have 3d6 models coming back. Now we're only 3d3 models coming back. Now we have 1d3. I don't know why they weakened the necromancy in the necromancy book, but this sort of chart is to, I guess, restrict the power level of doing that, and to sort of make you play in a way where you put your Mortark sort of in the middle of all your summonable guys, and you put your Vampire Lords and your Death Mages sort of around them, and you build this big castle with concentric rings, so that when your opponent does damage to one unit, all the guys can sort of heal all of your units at once. I think that's what they're imagining. In practice, you never have more than one damaged unit, maybe two at most, that are wholly within 12 of a hero at the start of your turn. And the minimum is 2. So this has never come up. I've never needed to check this chart. I've never needed to know it. This may as well just say every unit within 12. Having to say that you can't benefit from this ability more than once per turn, I don't know why that's the case. It was fine before. But you could get rid of that if you just said each unit within 12. In addition, a unit cannot benefit from this ability and Invocation of Nagash. Why not? Who cares? It's another 3 models. You're buying Nagash. He's like 1,000 points. Who cares if you get another 3 skeletons? It's not a big deal. Nagash isn't any good anyway. Sorry, I went to the wrong slide. It's just frustrating, and it's a huge block of text for like no reason. And there's a couple of these in the book where they just don't need to exist. They don't need to be nearly as complicated as they are. Just a little note on this. This is called Deathly Invocation, and the spell that we have is called Invigorating Aura. An invocation is a spell, and an aura is what this is doing, where you just sort of passively heal things back. So this should be called Invigorating Aura, and Deathly Invocation, and Invigorating Aura should be called Deathly Invocation. Just, it bugs me that that's the case. Not an actual rules problem, but just a weird happenstance. Pointless artifacts and command traits. We have, I think, 4... Blood, Knight, Virkos, Castellite, and Avangori. I'm forgetting Avangori. We have 5 subfactions. I think 4 of them all have 6 artifacts and 6 command traits, and Avangori I think have 3 of each. And most of them, if not like the majority of them, if not the same thing, most of them are bad. For example, the Virkos artifacts, all of their artifacts are bad. You just take out Arcane Tome every single time and don't even look at their artifacts. They suck. I think in Legion of Night, I think they have 2 good ones. It's like Morbeg's Claw and there's another one. Maybe the Chiropractor's Cloak. No, it's not that. It's Shard of Night. The immune to rend on shooting attacks. Sometimes people take that. I guess Chiropractor's Cloak is okay. But there's a lot of really junk artifacts, a lot of junk command traits, a lot of stuff that you never take and you never look at. And I don't know why they do that. I think the trend with newer books is to cut down on this stuff. So I expect a lot of that will sort of go away. But it was all in this book. We still got it in 2nd edition. Lack of synergy and awkward list building. So I'll give you an example on this one on what I mean. So the Virkos subfaction bonus for they've got 2. One of them is rerolls to cast on their Vampire Lords, and the other one is +1 to wound if you're wholly within 9 of a vampire hero if you're a summonable unit. Who are these bonuses for? All right, summonable units. All right, let's go through our summonable units. We've got zombies who basically never roll to wound because they hit on a 5-up and 6s do immortal. So it's only 1 in 6 of them hit, and then you're wounding on a 5-up. So even going to a 4-up doesn't really help. So +1 to wound is actually useless for zombies. You find a big trend. There's no subfaction. None of them are good for zombies. Not directly anyway. I think people play Virkos just because, but you could really play any subfaction and pick zombies because they're not really supported by the subfaction. You've got like Black Knights. Black Knights are too fast for the Vampire Lords that you have, so it's unlikely you'll get the bonus. And because they changed the charge bonus on Black Knights from getting a bonus damage to doing D3 mortals, buffing their attacks is not nearly as useful as it used to be. If you gave them better to hit and to wound before, on a charge, they might actually do something. Now it's like, I may as well buff my Skeleton Warriors. Speaking of, Skeleton Warriors have 1 attack. So +1 to wound here is weak. You can, I guess, put a Vampire Lord next to them and give them the +1 attack. You can't use all-out attack in the same turn, which is a big problem with that command ability. But then they're still not doing a ton of damage, and you're using like a 140-point hero to buff a double reinforced 240-point unit, and it's still not going to do a lot of damage. You really want to stack it again with the Necromancer pile in and fight twice, so that essentially your skeletons get 4 attacks and they get to get back up twice. But then you're piling like 265 points of buffs onto a 240-point unit. So really the only thing... there's also Fellbats. I guess they're summonable, but they do 0 damage. They're like 3 attacks, 4s and 4s, 1 damage. So the +1 to wound is useless on basically everything except Graveguard. They're good on Graveguard. So we've got one winner. And yeah, and that seems like a really good buff. It seems like +1 to wound when you're near a Vampire Lord. And you already want to take a Vampire Lord because he's getting rerolls to cast. Those are 2 excellent bonuses. Except he gets rerolls to cast for bad spells and +1 to wound on like mostly junk and also Graveguard. Really frustrating. Like it's a weird, awkward sort of thing where you're like, I don't know where to put this or what to do with this. It should be good, but it's not. Another one might be like in Legion of Night, you can put units in ambush, but now you can put units in graves and bring them out of graves anyway without needing the hero there. So it's kind of like a double up on the same ability. And you get +1 to your save on Death Rattle units in turn 1, but they lowered the save of Black Knights by 1. So it's sort of like, it's hard to use the +1 to save on turn 1. I think there is a way of like, summoning 30 skeletons on a middle sort of objective. That does work, but they're not durable enough. They're not a true anvil. They can't really hold that. And because they're not picking the thing, they can pick the spot, but they can't pick the thing that's going to come into them. It just doesn't really work. It's like awkward. None of it quite fits. And I just find this constantly. There's lots of little pain points. Even like Legion of Blood, I used to like the idea that you should take a Vengorian Lord and give him the command trait so that 6s to hit do mortal wounds, like Walking Death, because he's not a monster. He doesn't have like a mount. All of his profiles would benefit from that bonus. But now, if you're in Legion of Blood, it really incentivizes you to play Vampire Lords on zombie dragons and make them your general, because of you get +1 attack and things like that. It's just a weird sort of book with a lot of strange synergies that feel like they're good on paper, but don't translate well into the actual game. Feels like there's a lot of like wasted potential. And not that it's bad, like +1 to wound on your Graveguard. If that was just, Graveguard get +1 to wound while they're wholly within 9 of a Vampire Lord on the Virkos bonus, that would still be okay. But that's really what it is, and it just doesn't look like that in the book. So you like, every time you build a list, you get excited about something, and then you realize it doesn't really work that well. And you have to sort of go back to just getting like 10% of what you thought you were getting. It's probably enough on that one. Exemptions for death. This needs to go. Reanimated horrors, the like -1 bravery if you're near our zombies and skeletons, but not near vampires. Vampires aren't scary, but skeletons are scary. So you get -1 to your bravery if you're near a skeleton unit. Unless you're also a skeleton, then you don't get -1 to your bravery. I think all of these things are horrible. They feel really horrible. Things that don't work against death, like the Mortis engine as well. I think it's just its attack. It's Whale of Doom, I think, or maybe it's the special ability. Something in that War Scroll doesn't work against other death. The Amaranthian Orb, not that it's a great spell, but also doesn't work against death. And I'm not sure why they do this. I know it's meant to be flavorful, but it just ruins the game. It makes you unable to put these things in your list, makes them like narrative only type of rules. And one of them is like a core ability that you can't avoid, right? You can choose not to take Amethystine Orb, or whatever it is, Amaranthine Orb. You can choose not to take the Mortis Engine, but you can't choose not to take Reanimated Horrors. You just get that, and you have to remember it, and you have to also remember that it doesn't work against death. And that's probably the worst offender, because it's double accounted. I think all the bravery things that do this double account, where like Nighthaunt, for example, Nighthaunt are ghosts, and the people at Games Workshop recognize that ghosts probably aren't scared of much. So to reflect the fact that ghosts are essentially very brave, they give Nighthaunt like bravery 10 across the board. And then in the Soulblight book, they publish a rule that says, you know what, I don't think ghosts would be afraid of much. So I don't think this ability that lowers bravery would work against ghosts. You should do one or the other. Either ghosts have normal bravery and all the abilities that all the bravery debuffs don't work against them. Even if that's the case, that should still be in the Nighthaunt book. That should be like the Coalesce rule, where they're just immune to modifiers or negative modifiers. It just should never be the case that my book is trying to account for how brave your soldiers are and putting in saying, well, actually, no, this only works against some things because I think some other things they might be too brave. It should always just be like, I'm going to give you -2 bravery. And if you're a really brave kind of unit, you're not afraid of things like skeletons because, I don't know, you are a skeleton, then that's going to be reflected in the fact that you already have like 10 bravery. So it's not going to scare you as much as it scares like a human who has 6 bravery or something like that. The double accounting and the exemptions for death like just make everything wonky, and they never work in practice. They always have like a weird edge case sort of outcome because of that. I put Cursed City in here with a question mark. I kind of like that you can play with your Cursed City models in Age of Sigmar, but man, it's a lot of War Scrolls and they're all bad. I kind of like that they're all bad because then I don't have to go and buy Cursed City to play my army. I can be happy that those are all over there, and you know, you can enjoy them. I just kind of wish that I didn't have to have this big block of stuff in my app or in my book that is sort of just taking up space. Maybe if they like move the section, like they chuck it, if they space the thing out so that like it's in narrative play or something, or they only show up in the app if you select narrative play. I know that would disappoint some people, and again, I kind of like that you can use them, and that's why it's got a question mark, because I'm probably wrong about this, but it bugs me because I'm not the kind of person who uses it. If you are the kind of person that uses it, then I guess call me an idiot in the comments. Lastly, I'm going to talk about a few bad War Scrolls. The book did really well, actually, I think, in terms of making the War Scrolls viable. Most of them are pretty good. At the very least, they're usable. I think, like, I like the skeletons, I like the zombies, I like Graveguard, Blood Knights are pretty good, Manfred's good, Vlozzard's okay, probably needs +1 to hit on some of its attacks, like its claws. But yeah, in general, I think it's got a good set of War Scrolls. Very few things in here are just flat bad. But the ones that stand out are the White Kings, the Black Knights on release. They got better since the points have dropped, but they still need like a clearer role. And maybe the Vengorian Lord. I don't see many people playing the Vengorian Lord, and I think it's because he's got like the weird 10 wounds and only has a 6-up ward. So he just dies to mortal wounds really quick for a 280 point model. But the White King, I think, is the biggest offender here. And I actually think there was a place for the White King. On release, the White King had a broken War Scroll. And I don't mean broken like broken powerful, I mean broken literally didn't work kind of broken. His command ability said, in the hero phase, target Death Rattle unit rerolls 1s to hit until the end of that phase. So not very useful, giving rerolls of 1s to hit in the hero phase until the end of that phase. But they errated it, and I think they errated it the wrong way. I think initially they envisaged that ability going from the hero phase until your next hero phase, so then you could use it with something like all out attack at the same time. So in the hero phase, you'd give the Graveguard unit reroll ones to hit. Then in the combat phase, you give them +1 attack with the Vampire Lord, or you give them +1 to hit with just the unit champion through all out attack, and you can sort of stack the bonuses. They errated it so that it worked in the combat phase, and reroll ones to hit is worse than +1 attack and worse than +1 to hit. So if you've got either of those buffs, you would just use them. There is like a really niche case where, let's say you're wholly in 12 of Manfred, so you've already got +1 to hit, and you're not within 12 of a Vampire Lord. I don't know why you wouldn't be, because you're wholly within 12 of a White King. And I guess if you're buying a White King, you should have just bought a Vampire Lord. Maybe you didn't have the points. Maybe, you know, they made the White King cheaper. He's only 90 points now. So you want to save your 50 points. And instead of +1 attack, then you use reroll ones to hit, because they're already hitting on 2s. That's like the only circumstance I can see where the White King's command ability actually does something. I don't know why they do this. The White King is an amazing model. The new one that came out is an amazing model. And he's just horrible. Nobody takes him. And I'm really sad about that. I'm really hoping the new book changes that. Black Knights are a different sort of issue. They just don't have like a good role. They don't really do damage. They don't really take damage. They're not so much faster than Direwolves that it's worth taking them over Direwolves. You have this weird continuum of like Direwolves are slow and tough, Black Knights are a bit faster and a bit less tough, and then Fellbats are faster still and even less tough. And they just sort of have this weird like middle ground where they don't really do anything. But I'm hoping that'll change. So I think that's probably enough for this video. Again, I don't really plan on making a whole ton of videos. I do play a fair bit of Soulblight Gravelords, and I'm really excited for the new book. And I'll probably do a video going over that Battletome in detail. And it'd be great to do it on stream with like some other people. If they want to chime in and give me feedback and that sort of thing, that would be really nice. But I don't imagine that happening. Nevertheless, if you are interested, if you want me to make more videos, particularly about Soulblight, then leave a comment to that effect, and that'll encourage me to sort of make more of this stuff. So yeah, hopefully you found some of my thoughts on that interesting, and I'd like to sort of hear your thoughts on it, whether you think that you had like similar problems with the book. I should mention I really liked the book, and I did like playing it. I just think the flavor's a bit low, and I'd really like to see the thematic elements of the army be a lot stronger, even if it means that other elements of the army are weaker. But I think Soulblight has like really pronounced weaknesses already, so maybe that's just grass is greener type talking. Anyway, let me know what you think, and yeah, I might see you around on the next one.